My name is Amelia Croft. I'm 38 years old, and for the last 14 months, I have been meticulously rebuilding a life from the ground up, brick by salvaged brick. Before that, my life was a different structure entirely, one designed by committee, where my own blueprints were always the first to be folded up and put away. I'm a mother to two of the most observant souls I know, Leo, who at 12, carries the quiet weight of the world in his thoughtful gaze, and Chloe, my 7-year-old whirlwind of questions and bright, unwavering light. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Northwood district of Port Blossom, a city that hugs the Oregon coast, where the air smells of rain-soaked pine and the persistent salt of the Pacific. Our apartment is small, but the windows are large, and in the mornings, the light pools on the hardwood floors like spilled honey. It is our sanctuary, a place where the only ghosts are the faint outlines of crayon on the walls that I haven't quite managed to scrub away. This life, this quiet, sunlit space, is the one I chose. It came after a decade of marriage that slowly eroded my sense of self and a lifetime of being the designated fixer in my family of origin. I am a project manager by trade, specializing in sustainable urban development. I create order from chaos for a living. For years, I did the same at home, for everyone but myself. But 14 months ago, I finally clocked out. So, when the invitation to Thanksgiving arrived via a clipped phone call from my mother, a familiar sense of weary obligation settled over me. It wasn't a question, but a summons. "Dinner's at 3, she'd said. "Don't be late. And Amelia, bring one of your fancy desserts. Sarah is attempting a cheesecake, and we'll need a backup." I spent the Wednesday night before the holiday baking a pear and almond tart, the kind with a ridiculously fragile crust and pears fanned out in a perfect, elegant spiral. Leo and Chloe helped, their small hands dusting flour across the counter, their laughter echoing in our small kitchen. It was a happy, messy creation, an offering of peace I wasn't sure would be accepted. I packed it carefully, a fragile hope in a cardboard box. The drive to my parents' house was a journey back in time. We left the neat, walkable streets of Northwood, with its independent bookstores and coffee shops, and drove east, toward the older, more established suburbs of Laurel Heights. The houses there sit on large, manicured lots, set back from the road behind imposing hedges and decades-old oak trees. My parents' house, a sprawling 2-story colonial, was the house I grew up in. It held every version of me I had ever been, and I was never sure which one would be waiting for me at the door. The November sky was a seamless sheet of gray, the kind that promised a cold, persistent drizzle but couldn't be bothered to deliver. I parked on the street, behind my brother Daniel's gleaming new SUV. Leo held the tart with the reverence of a bomb disposal expert, while Chloe clung to my hand, her other clutching a small, stuffed owl. I rang the bell, the familiar chime echoing from deep within the house. We waited. The cold air seeped through my coat. After a minute, I felt the old, familiar pull of habit and led the children around to the back. The kitchen door was unlocked, as it always was. The smell was the first thing that hit me, roasting turkey, the sweet tang of my father's honey-glazed ham, and something else, something sharp and unwelcoming beneath the holiday scents. My mother, Eleanor, stood at the immense granite island, her back to us, arranging artisanal cheeses on a slate board. Her posture was rigid. My father, Richard, was in his usual armchair by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand, his attention fixed on the sports highlights flickering on the television. He didn't turn. My brother, Daniel, was holding court on the leather sofa, his feet propped up on the antique coffee table. His wife, Sarah, sat beside him, her laughter a constant, high-pitched counterpoint to his booming voice. She was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of cream, and her perfectly manicured hand rested on his knee. They were a portrait of effortless success, a picture my parents had been trying to frame for years. "Hello," I said, my voice feeling too small for the large, vaulted room. "Happy Thanksgiving." Leo carefully placed the tart on the only free space on the counter. "We brought dessert," he announced softly. No one moved. The air was thick with a silence that was not peaceful, but pointed. Finally, my younger sister, Clara, emerged from the dining room, a stack of linen napkins in her hands. Clara, the family's perennial diplomat, her smile always a little strained, as if holding back a sigh. "Amelia." "Hi," she said, her eyes darting from me to my mother's stiff back. Sorry, we weren't sure you were still coming. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. You invited me, Clara. She gave a helpless little shrug. I know, but Daniel thought you might have made other plans. Things have been so hectic. The subtext was clear. Your life is complicated. You are an inconvenience. Chloe, sensing the chill, tugged on my coat. Mommy, where do we put our jackets? She whispered. My gaze drifted past Clara into the dining room. The long mahogany table was set for 12. 12 gleaming place settings, 12 wine glasses, 12 folded napkins held in silver rings. My mother had even used the handwritten place cards Sarah had made, her elegant calligraphy spelling out the names of aunts, uncles, cousins. I counted again. 12. There was no children's table set up in the corner, no high chairs borrowed for the younger cousins, no folding table pulled from the garage, as there had been every year since I could remember. Just 12 chairs at one very long, very adult table. Clara followed my gaze, and a flush of color rose in her cheeks. She cleared her throat. Oh, right. We figured it would be more fun for the kids to have their own space this year. We ordered pizza for them in the den. There's a movie on. More fun for them. The words hung in the air, a flimsy curtain over the truth. It would be more convenient for us. Leo's shoulders slumped. He didn't say a word, but he had heard everything. No one had asked how we were. No one had commented on Chloe's new haircut or asked Leo about his recent science fair project. It wasn't the grand, dramatic rejection you see in films. It was quieter, 1,000 tiny paper cuts that bled you dry without a single drop being spilled. I looked around the room, at the faces of the people who were supposed to be my anchor, and realized with a startling, painful clarity, I was a guest. And they weren't even sure I was on the list. I forced a smile for my children. Pizza and a movie sounds like an adventure, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally bright. I led them down the hall to the den, the same room where I'd spent countless hours of my own childhood. The pizza boxes were stacked on an end table next to a stack of paper plates. The air was stuffy. I knelt and helped them settle onto the oversized sectional sofa, pulling a soft chenille throw over their laps. Is this okay, sweethearts? Chloe nodded, already distracted by the promise of cheese pizza. But Leo's eyes, so much like my own, were fixed on my face. He saw the cracks in my smile. When are we going home? He asked, his voice a bare whisper. The question pierced through my carefully constructed composure. Soon, I promised, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. After we eat. Not just yet. Back in the main room, the volume had increased. My father was laughing at one of Daniel's stories, a loud, booming sound that never seemed to greet my own accomplishments. My mother was now pouring wine, her movements brisk and efficient, her eyes avoiding mine. I took my pear tart from its box and placed it beside Sarah's slightly sunken cheesecake. It looked lonely and out of place. I stood there for a moment, an island in the middle of a familiar sea, and felt a profound shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a kind of quiet resignation, the moment you finally stop pushing against a door that has been locked to you for a very long time. I think we'll probably head out after a little while, I said, aiming my voice into a brief lull in the conversation. No one turned. It was Sarah who responded, without looking at me. Oh, right. Busy mom life, she said with a little tittering laugh. The single-parent hustle. I can't even imagine. She said it with a tone of manufactured pity, as if my life were a sad, cautionary tale. As if she hadn't asked me to help her write the business plan for her boutique just 6 months prior. As if my father hadn't called me last year to mediate a fight between her and my mother. That was it. The final brick in a wall I hadn't even realized I was building. I straightened my spine. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice, when it came out, was steady and calm. It landed in the space between them with a quiet, undeniable weight. Actually, I began. Before we go, there's something I need to share. That got their attention. The laughter died. Sarah's smile faltered. My father lowered his glass. Even my mother turned from the counter, a wine bottle still in her hand. I looked at each of them, my gaze lingering for a moment on my parents. I've made a decision. I'm pulling back. I let the words settle. From everything. The financial support, the help with the bills, the emergency calls. All of it. A flicker of confusion crossed my father's face. What are you talking about, Amelia? The HOA fees for your mother's condo. Among other things, I said evenly. Clara looked horrified. But I thought you wanted to help, Amy. You offered. I did, I acknowledged, nodding. And I will always care about this family. But I've realized I can't be the emergency fund and the emotional support hotline anymore. I'm carrying my own life now, and it's more than enough. Daniel snorted, a dismissive, ugly sound. Carrying? You help Mom with a couple $100 a month. Let's not be dramatic. He hadn't worked a steady job in 5 years, living off a series of ventures funded by our parents' dwindling retirement savings. I didn't say that. I didn't need to. I kept my eyes on my parents. I'm doing what's best for me and for my children, I said. That's my priority now. It has to be. There was a long, heavy silence. I waited for someone to say thank you. Thank you for the years you helped. Thank you for co-signing that loan. Thank you for talking Dad through his health scare. Thank you for proofreading every one of Daniel's resumes. But no thanks came. No one asked why. It was my mother who finally broke the silence. Her voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. We never asked you to do any of it, Amelia. And there it was. The final, absolute truth. They hadn't asked. They had simply expected. They had taken, and I had given, and we had all pretended it was a fair exchange. The silence that followed her words wasn't awkward. It was an ending. I walked to the hallway and picked up Chloe's coat from the hook where I'd hung it. Leo met me there, a half-eaten slice of pizza in his hand. Are we leaving now? He asked, his eyes wide. I looked down the long hall, past the gallery of family photos that hadn't been updated in years. Daniel and Sarah's wedding portrait took center stage. My own wedding photo had been quietly moved to a smaller frame on a side table after my divorce, and then, I noticed for the first time, it had disappeared entirely. I wasn't on this wall anymore. Yes, sweetheart, I said, my voice gentle. We're leaving. We drove home through the deepening twilight. The city lights of Port Blossom twinkled ahead of us like a welcoming harbor. In the back seat, Leo and Chloe had fallen asleep, their heads leaning against each other, their breath fogging the cold glass. The car was warm, but a chill had settled deep in my bones. I cracked the window, letting the cold, damp air rush in, a bracing shock to my system. Our apartment was quiet when we stepped inside, a stillness that used to feel like loneliness, but now felt like peace. It felt like breath. Leo, unprompted, took off his shoes and lined them up neatly by the door. Chloe, still half asleep, climbed into my lap on the sofa and buried her face in my sweater, her small body a warm, solid weight against mine. Did we do something bad, Mommy? She mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. I held her close, stroking her hair, my own throat tight with unshed tears. How do you explain to a child that sometimes love isn't enough? That sometimes the people who are supposed to see you most clearly don't see you at all? No, my love, I whispered into her hair. We didn't do anything bad at all. We just learned that we can't choose how other people treat us. But we can choose what home feels like. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her eyes serious. Do we still love them? The question was so pure, so devoid of the anger and hurt that was churning inside me. It was a child's search for a simple truth in a complicated world. Yes, I said, the word feeling both true and not true at all. I think the love can stay, but we have to keep it safe. Sometimes that means we love them from a little farther away. Leo had curled up at the other end of the sofa, wrapped in the chenille throw I'd brought back from my parents' den. He was quiet, but I saw he was listening. He hadn't asked for a hug in years, but he reached out and rested his head against my arm. It was enough. We sat there for a long time as the city outside grew dark. The only light in the room came from the street lamp outside our window. On our small coffee table was a drawing Chloe had made at school last week. It was 3 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided, smiling sun. She had written our names above the figures in shaky purple letters. Elio, C. Celoi, and Mom. No one else. No one was missing. I got up, took the drawing, and pinned it with a magnet to the center of our refrigerator. Right where we would see it every single morning. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, in our small, quiet apartment, we were finally, completely home. The first attempt at contact came the following Tuesday. A missed call from Clara. An hour later, 2 from my mother. I let them go to voicemail. The messages were brief, clipped, laced with a bewildered indignation. Amelia, It's your sister. Just call me back when you get this. Amelia, your father and I are very concerned. You left so abruptly. I hope the children weren't too upset. We need to talk about what you said. It was very dramatic. The word dramatic was a classic Eleanor move. It was her way of reframing my legitimate feelings as an overreaction, a character flaw. For years, it had worked. This time, I just deleted the message. By Friday, Sarah, my sister-in-law, had resorted to sending a direct message on social media, a medium so impersonal it was an insult in itself. Hey Amelia, hope you're doing okay. Just a heads up, there are some family things going on. It would probably be good for everyone to connect. Let me know when you have a minute to come by. Not, I'm sorry for how I spoke to you. Not, we miss you. Just a summons, disguised as a casual check-in. I was standing in my kitchen that night, the phone face down on the counter, its notification light pulsing a steady, insistent blue. Leo was asleep on the couch, a book about constellations resting on his chest. From the bathroom, I could hear Chloe humming to herself in the tub, a happy, tuneless sound. I leaned against the cool granite, watching that blinking light, and felt nothing but a distant sense of calm. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because a part of their well-oiled machine had broken, and they were just now realizing I was the one who held the toolbox. The following afternoon, Clara showed up at my door. She didn't call first. She just appeared, holding a white paper bag from a local bakery, the kind we used to frequent in college. It was a gesture meant to evoke a simpler time, a time before our lives had fractured. She looked exhausted. Her lipstick was smudged, and her eyes had the dark, bruised look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. Can I come in? She asked, her voice thin. I stepped aside, holding the door open. She hovered in the entryway, clutching the bag of pastries like a shield. It's Daniel, she said, getting straight to the point. He's in some trouble. A lot of trouble, actually. And Mom and Dad, well, they're not handling it well. I waited, saying nothing. I simply leaned against the doorframe and watched her. She glanced at me, her expression a mixture of desperation and frustration. They could really use your help, Amy, to sort this out. You're the one who understands all the financial stuff. There it was. The unspoken job description. Amelia, the fixer. Amelia, the translator of crises. Amelia, the calm voice in the storm. I'm sorry to hear that, Clara, I said, and I felt a pang of sympathy for my sister, who was so clearly trapped in the middle of it all. I'm glad you felt you could come here. A flicker of hope lit her eyes. So you'll help. I took a slow breath. I'm glad you came, I repeated gently. But I don't think I'm the right person to help them with this. Her face fell. The hope vanished, replaced by a familiar look of exasperated disbelief. Amelia, this is serious. He could lose everything. They could lose everything. I understand that it's serious, I said. But they have lawyers. They have financial advisors. They have each other. They don't need me. They just want the version of me that makes things easier for them. Clara didn't argue. She just stared at the bag of pastries in her hand as if she'd forgotten what it was for. Before she left, she took one last look around my small, sunlit living room. You've really made this place nice, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It feels like a real home. I didn't tell her that was because we had finally decided who was allowed to live in it. The silence returned, but this time it was heavier. A week went by. Then the official notices started. Not to me directly, but through the back channels I had forgotten to close. An email from Leo's school, forwarded from the main office. The emergency contact payment for his after-school robotics club had been declined. The card on file was my father's. Then a call from Chloe's daycare. The automatic payment for the month had failed. Another one of my father's accounts. The final piece of the puzzle came from a woman named Susan, my former bank manager, an old-school professional who had handled my first mortgage. I still had alerts tied to my parents' accounts from a few years back when my father had surgery and I'd managed their finances. Susan called me as a professional courtesy. Amelia, hi, it's Susan over at Port Blossom Community Bank, she began, her voice low and careful. I'm not sure if you're still involved with your father's accounts, but I felt I should give you a heads up. There's been some unusual activity on his home equity line of credit. Unusual activity was banker speak for a catastrophe. She told me that Daniel had been added as a co-signer to the account 6 weeks ago. In the last month, he had withdrawn nearly $85,000. The money was gone. His latest venture, a farm-to-table bistro in a trendy, high-rent district, had gone under before it had even opened, drowning in debt from custom-built furniture and unpaid contractors. He had used the house, my childhood home, as his personal ATM to try and stop the bleeding. And now, the bank was preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings. That evening, my mother sent a long, rambling text message. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression and deflected responsibility. Amelia, I know you said you needed space, but this situation with your brother has become critical. If you have any bandwidth at all, we could really use your strategic mind to help us negotiate with the bank. You always had such a way with these things. They listened to you. Not once did she mention Thanksgiving. Not once did she acknowledge my feelings. It was a business request, plain and simple. We need your skills. Please advise. I stared at the message until the words blurred. I thought about the pear tart. I thought about the empty chairs. I thought about the years I had spent making myself small so that my brother could feel big. The next day, Clara sent a photo with no caption. It was a picture of the front door of our old house. Taped to the wood was a bright orange official notice. The word foreclosure was visible even in the blurry image. She didn't need to add a comment. The picture screamed for her. That night, Leo found me in the kitchen, long after Chloe was asleep. I was staring out the window at the rain-slicked street, a mug of cold tea in my hands. He came and stood beside me, his shoulder just brushing my arm. "They're in a lot of trouble, aren't they?" he asked quietly. I looked down at my son, at his serious, knowing face. I had tried to shield him from so much, but he saw it all. He had always seen it. I nodded. "Yes, honey, they are." He was quiet for a moment, tracing a pattern on the fogged-up windowpane. "Are we going to help them?" I knelt down, so we were eye to eye. I put my hands on his slim shoulders. "I'm going to do what I promised you I would do," I said softly. "I'm going to do what's best for us. For our little family." "Okay." He leaned into me then, wrapping his arms around my neck in a rare, unprompted hug. His body was warm and real against mine. In the past, I would have already been on the phone, a laptop open on the counter, a pot of coffee brewing for a long night of crisis management. But tonight, I just stayed there, on the cool linoleum floor of my own kitchen, holding my son. They had built a palace of expectations around Daniel, a fortress of second chances. Now that the walls were crumbling, they wanted me to be the mortar. But I had finally run out of cement. Clara called on a Sunday morning while I was folding laundry, the pale morning light just beginning to filter through the blinds. Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual forced cheerfulness. "The bank is calling the loan," she said, without preamble. "They're going to lose the house this week." I paused, one of Leo's t-shirts, the one with a faded map of the solar system, clutched in my hand. "What do you want me to do, Clara?" I asked, my voice even. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. "Just come over," she finally said, her voice cracking. "Please, Amy. Talk to them. Dad will listen to you. You can explain the options. They don't need your money. They just need your head, your logic." My logic, my calm, the very qualities they had so often dismissed as cold or unfeeling were now the assets they desperately needed to reclaim. It was a bitter, painful irony. "I'll think about it," I said, which was a kindness. I had already made my decision. That evening, she showed up again, this time with a thick manila folder. Her face was pale, her eyes pleading. "I'm just the messenger," she said, thrusting the folder at me. "Don't shoot me." I took it from her but didn't open it. "I'm not angry, Clara." She took a shaky breath. "I know this isn't fair. I know we've all leaned on you for way too long." A flicker of something real, something close to an apology. I waited. "But this is our family, Amelia. What will people think? The neighbors, everyone at church." Mom is mortified. And there it was. Not the fear of homelessness, but the fear of humiliation. The fear of their carefully curated image being shattered. It was never about the foundation, it was always about the facade. "You always knew how to keep the peace," she added, a last-ditch appeal to the role I had played for so long. I placed the folder on the small table by the door. "I'm not angry," I repeated, my voice soft but unyielding. But I am done setting myself on fire to keep others warm. Her expression hardened. The brief vulnerability was gone, replaced by a defensive chill. So that's it? You're just out? You're going to let them lose their home. The accusation was clear. This will be your fault. I'm not out, I replied. I've just stopped trying to get in. There's a difference. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. She left the folder on the table. Just in case, it seemed to say. Later that night, long after the city had fallen quiet, my doorbell rang again. My heart gave a single, hard thud. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing on the doormat. He was alone. I opened the door. He looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken by a weight that had nothing to do with gravity. The confident, commanding presence he always projected was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. He held his worn tweed cap in his hands, twisting the brim. "Amelia," he said. "Just my name. May I come in?" I didn't answer. I simply stepped back and held the door open. He walked into the small entryway, but didn't go any farther. He stood on the welcome mat, his eyes scanning the hallway wall where my new gallery of photos hung. Leo's science fair ribbon. Chloe in her cardboard astronaut helmet. A picture of the three of us at the coast, squinting into the sun, our arms wrapped around each other. "You've done well here," he said, his voice raspy. "A good home." I waited. He let out a long, slow sigh. "Your brother, he made a terrible mistake. We enabled him. We didn't see how bad it had gotten." He glanced at me, a quick, furtive look. "Your mother, she wanted to come. She's too ashamed." I didn't offer a comforting word. I just let the silence sit between us, heavy and real. "We never meant to push you away, Amelia," he continued, his gaze fixed on the floor. It all got so complicated after your divorce. Your choices, they made things difficult for everyone. Your choices. The old, familiar narrative. My choice to leave an unhappy marriage. My choice to build an independent life. My choice to prioritize my own children's well-being. In his world, these were not acts of courage, but acts of inconvenience. "I didn't come here to argue," he added quickly, as if sensing my resolve hardening. "I came to ask if there is anything at all you can do. To help us hold this together. Just for a little while longer." I looked at my father, at this man who had taught me how to read a stock market report but not how to express vulnerability, who had taught me the importance of a firm handshake, but not the value of a sincere apology. And I felt a wave of profound, aching sadness. "You built a system, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "A system where Daniel was the sun and everyone else were just planets in his orbit. A system where I was only valued for my function. I was the family's CFO, the project manager, the crisis negotiator. And now you're asking me to come back, not because you miss my presence, but because you miss my function." His mouth opened, then closed again. He had no response. I took a step closer, not to menace, but to be heard. "I was there all along," I said, the words coming from a place deep inside me that had been silent for too long. "I was at every holiday. I was on the other end of every late-night phone call. I was there when the bank statements didn't add up. You just didn't see me. You saw the solution I provided. It was always easier to see the solution than the person." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't angry or awkward. It was hollow. It was the sound of a truth finally being spoken into a space that had never made room for it. He finally looked up and met my eyes. I saw not anger, but a deep, fathomless regret. He gave a single, sharp nod. When he left, he didn't say goodbye. And he didn't take the folder Clara had left behind. I watched him walk down the path to the street, his shoulders stooped. Then I switched off the porch light. The holidays came and went in a soft, muted hush. There were no more calls, no more unannounced visits. The silence was no longer a weapon or a punishment. It was simply a space. A quiet, empty room. I decorated our apartment with a string of white lights and a small, fragrant fir tree that Leo and Chloe picked out at a local lot. They adorned it with handmade paper ornaments and clumsy clay stars from school. It was modest and imperfect and entirely our own. In mid-January, a single envelope appeared in our mailbox. It was handwritten on my mother's familiar cream-colored stationery, but there was no return address. Inside were 4 pages of her tight, sloping cursive. It was not an apology. It was a long, meandering narrative of her life, of her hopes for her children, filled with vague regrets and justifications. But one sentence, near the end, snagged in my mind. "We didn't mean for you to feel so alone, Amelia. We just didn't know where you fit anymore after everything changed." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer in the kitchen, the one where I keep the spare keys and the instruction manuals for appliances. I didn't throw it away. I just didn't need to read it again. A week later, Leo came to me while I was making dinner. "Mom," he said, "can we change the pictures in the hallway?" "What do you mean, honey?" He pointed to the few remaining frames I hadn't yet replaced, old school pictures, a faded photo of me and Clara as teenagers. "Can we make it just us now?" he asked. "Just our story?" And so we did. That Saturday, we took down every last frame. We patched the nail holes and put on a fresh coat of pale gray paint. Then we started over. We printed new photos. The 3 of us on the beach at sunset. Chloe, gap-toothed and grinning, on her first day of 2nd grade. Leo, looking proud and slightly embarrassed, holding his robotics trophy. And one I loved most of all, a candid shot someone had taken of us on the sofa, tangled up together, laughing so hard Chloe was crying. I had it printed large and put it in a simple wooden frame, right in the center of the wall. No one else. No ghosts. Just us. In early March, a text from Clara arrived. One sentence. "The house sold. Mom and Dad are with Daniel for now. It's a mess." I read it and then I deleted it. There was nothing left to say. That night, after the kids were in bed, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the living room window, looking out at the quiet street. For years, I had lived in a state of low-grade anticipation, waiting for the next phone call, the next crisis, the next demand. I was always braced for the knock on the door. But tonight, the air was still. The porch light was off. The silence was not empty, but full. It was full of peace. Full of the life I had built, not from the ashes of the old one, but from a new and solid ground. If you have ever had to quietly, deliberately take your own name off an invitation list, if you have ever had to build your own table because you were no longer welcome at theirs, you will understand. You don't have to announce your departure. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop showing up. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is the one you finally, bravely, show yourself.